Welcome to the itdvds.com YouTube channel. This is just a sample of the training available at itdvds.com. If you would like to see complete training, please go to itdvds.com. Now let's begin the sample. There are really two main ways we can install software on our Windows 7 machine. The first is to deploy the software with something like Group Policy or System Center Configuration Manager or another third-party deployment tool. The other way is to actually install the software manually by logging into the computer and running the installer. In either case, if we run into a problem during our installation, then most likely it's going to fall into one of these particular categories. The first one is administrative rights. Normally, you do need to be a local administrator on your computer in order to install software. If you're unable to get past the UAC prompt, then there's a good chance you're not the local administrator. For example, if I double-click on this installer, click Run, try to click Yes to this UAC prompt, and it doesn't let me past it, then I'm probably not a local administrator. Or if it prompts me for credentials, and I enter in my credentials, and it still doesn't let me pass the UAC prompt, then there's a really good chance you're not a local administrator, and you need to either get credentials so that you can type them in that are a local administrator, or log into this computer with a different account that is a local administrator, and then run the installer. One way you can confirm who or what groups are local administrators, go to the Start menu, right-click on Computer, go to Manage, and notice there's a little UAC shield here. That means that you do have to be a local administrator to run this computer management snap-in. So if you can't run it, then you're definitely not a local administrator. If you can run it, go ahead and expand local users and groups, highlight groups, double-click on the administrators group. And down here in the members section, you should either be listed explicitly like itdvds/lblack, or you should be a member of a group that's listed like itdvds/domain admin. So if I'm a domain admin, then I'm also a local administrator, and I shouldn't have any administrative issues with running an installer. So if you are an administrator, then most likely administrative rights is not your problem. But you can have a problem because the application was written before Windows Vista and it doesn't interact with the UAC prompt properly. So when it's supposed to launch the UAC prompt, when you double click on the installer, it actually doesn't. Therefore, that installer process doesn't run as an administrator. And everything may look fine, the installer is running, but then you run into an error during the installation process. That's because the installer tries to do something that requires administrative privileges, but since the process isn't running as an administrator, it doesn't have those privileges, and that's why it fails. So in that case, we may need to run the installer as the administrator manually. To do that, we can just right-click on the installer and then select Run as Administrator. We'll also get a UAC prompt, click Yes, then try to go through the installer and see if you get the error. If you still get to the error, the problem could be application compatibility. It could be that that application wasn't written for Windows 7 and therefore the installer has problems installing the application. Now, application compatibility is a huge issue, and we have several movies coming up specifically on application compatibility. The next issue could be with the certificate that the installer is signed with. Both your computer, your Windows 7 computer, and your user that you're logged on as has a list of certificates that it trusts. And if an application is signed with one of those certificates, then the installation will proceed normally. But if the application is signed with a certificate that is not in that list, so it's not trusted, then you'll most likely get a warning. And you want to pay close attention to those warnings and make sure that you really do want to install that application. If you do want to install the application, then you may need to import the root certificate from that particular vendor. To check your root certificates on your computer and with the user that you're logged into, the first way is you can type in cert mgr.msc. Hit enter. And with this, you're actually going to check the certificates for the current user, so the user that you're logged in as. Here's your trusted root certification authorities. If I just expand it out, highlight certificates, these are all your trusted root certificates. So if the application installer was signed by a certificate that was issued by one of these certification authorities, then the installer won't have a problem. If you decide that you want to install the root certificate from a particular vendor because it's not listed here, You can just right click on certificates, go to all tasks, import, click next, and then you'll browse to the particular certification file that most likely you'll download from the vendor's website. And then once it's trusted, you should be able to run the installer normally. Now this was the current user certificates. If you want to check the certificates that are installed on this computer, type in MMC, hit enter, click yes to the UAC prompt, go to File, Add Remove Snap-in, highlight Certificates, click Add. Here you can see you have three options. My user account, that's what we just looked at. You can also look at the certificates for a service account or the computer account. We want to look at the local computer here, and we'll select local computer, click Finish, click OK, and expand it out. And here's our trusted root certification authorities. So if we want to import the certificate to this computer so that any user is able to install applications that are signed from that particular vendor, then we would want to import it to the computer as opposed to the user. So the next category of issues you may run into is Windows 7 logo testing. If you get this warning, you want to be real careful, and most likely you won't want to install that particular application. Because in order to meet Windows 7 logo testing requirements, it has to meet certain guidelines like spyware guidelines. It has to be isolated from protected resources on Windows, and it has to have a reversible installation, so it has to have an uninstaller. And if it doesn't have those, probably a bad idea to install it because it could make your computer unstable. The next category is installation files and permissions. You want to make sure that all of the installation files necessary to install that particular application can be accessed by the installer. And also that the installer file, you have read and execute permissions on it. So let's take a look at that. If I right click on my installer, go to Properties, go to the Security tab, and I need to either be listed here explicitly or a member of a group that's listed. Let's say I'm a local administrator. I want to make sure I've got read and execute. So this box needs to be checked in order to run the installer. The next category is going to be licensing. Some installers require a serial number or a license key during the installation process. And some installers even require that a licensing service or a licensing server be available during the installation. So maybe you can't even install the application if that installer can't access that licensing server. If that's the case, then you want to make sure you have network connectivity to that licensing server. The next category is going to be 32-bit or 64-bit. You want to know what type of application you're installing. Is it a 32-bit application or a 64-bit application? If it's a 64-bit application, then you're not going to be able to install it on a 32-bit version of Windows 7. If it's a 32-bit application, you'll definitely be able to install it on Windows 7 32-bit, and most likely you will be able to install it on Windows 7 64-bit. But this also gets into application compatibility, which we're going to go into in depth in later movies. And the final category is going to be update dependencies. A lot of applications out there require that your computer, your Windows 7 computer, have certain updates. So it may need like a Service Pack 1 or a Service Pack 2 in order to run properly. So you want to make sure if your application requires these dependencies that they are installed on your Windows 7 machine.